Колеги, вітаю вас. Ми починаємо нашу дискусію «Рік
The
відновлення українського
year of
бізнесу».
recovery of the Ukrainian business. I am representing the Center of Economic Strategy. My name is Hlib Vyshlinsky. We are doing this together with the German economic team. That's our common event where we see what's happening with the economy, how the war affects it, and every month we choose one topic which is most interesting. When we planned this particular event, we had some optimistic topic on how the business is recovering. Definitely the main topic of this week is the blowing up of the Kakhovska hydropower station. We will shed light on that in our overall view of the economic situation, but we will still talk about the topic which we planned beforehand. Those businesses that we are very much thankful for them who decided to take part in our discussion. I believe that our colleagues, the representatives of these companies, they will also comment whether on their particular sector, on their particular industry, whether there will be also the influence of what happened this week. So that's what I said. We will evaluate a little bit the economic consequences of blowing up the Kakhovska hydropower station. We will talk about the challenges which Ukrainian business overcomes during the war. As usual, we have the English translation. We have also the live streaming in Facebook. This particular streaming is kept. You can always go back to it and to check it with your colleagues on a later stage or with your contacts. The English translation can be turned on when you see the globe in your panel below. If you have any questions, please put in the Q&A section of our Zoom, and if any of the speakers would like to answer, they can even answer during the whole event. And now I would like to give the floor to some short introductory words to Polushkin, who is the product manager for the German economic team. Gary, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Warm welcome from Berlin and to all participants of today's event. My name is Gary Polushkin. It's a great pleasure for me as the project manager for Ukraine of the German economic team to introduce today's webinar organized by the Center for Economic Strategy and the German economic team. The German economic team is an economic policy advisory project financed by the German Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate Action and has been very active in advising the Ukrainian government and state institutions for more than 15 years. Today's webinar is an important opportunity to discuss the state of Ukraine's economy, which is a regular part of the event, as well as today's very important topic, the recovery of the business sector. Russia's full-scale war has been causing a large shock to the business sector, for example, by territory occupation, the consequential migration, capital destructions, mines that affect businesses of all sizes and all sectors. However, business activities have been recently slowly improving as Ukraine's government and also Ukraine's partner countries and institutions introduced different important support measures. In this context, I'm very delighted that the Center for Economic Strategy has invited experts and business representatives that describe their experience of business development during the current full-scale war. I look forward to a very interesting discussion and giving back to Hlib and Center for Economic Strategy that hosts today's event. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Отже, зараз ми переходимо, власне, до огляду ситуації в...
So we are now going to the overall overview of the situation and what is happening in the Kakhovska hydropower station. I will pass the floor to Dmytro, who will tell us what was happening during the last months. Dmytro, the floor is yours. Colleagues, can you hear me real well? Yes. So let's traditionally start from the fiscal overview, from the war update. Everybody knows what is Kakhovska hydropower station is. We didn't understand the worst sense of this operation because some people say that it can be even interesting for the Ukrainian armed forces, so it should not be taken. I think it should be taken as a signal that they're losing the territories, the Russians are losing territories, and actually this act will worsen the supplies of water to the peninsula. Okay, so let's go back to the, I mean, if we talk with anyone, you can't simply do it with missiles. And with this hydropower station was under the control of the aggressor for so long, so there is no other argument, there is no other opinion, any other thoughts. It's very much evident who actually blew it up. Regarding the counteroffensive, even the economists wrote that the counteroffensive started. Maybe we don't know about it, even if we did know. We don't have the right to talk about it. But Bakhmut was surrendered, but we understood that it was a tactical defeat. We can see that the new types of ammunition and weapons are coming to Ukraine. We see the aviation coalition. We can see that Patriots really worked well. They could intercept these hypersonic missiles. This was not the first time it was one rocket, one missile. The next time it was 5, 6. So it was a super success, really a precedent, and that really has improved the mood of the population and the business regarding the overall security in Ukraine. Concerning the macroeconomic traits, we have some preliminary data regarding the GDP. Unfortunately, it's still down, but in the first quarter of this year, it was more, which was actually much better in the previous quarters when we had -30, and this is better than it was expected for this quarter, because the expectation was it would be the fall of 19. Of course, it's a technical thing, because we're trying to gradually compare it not only with the previous pre-aggression, but now with the aggression. So we will have some comparison in the framework of the full-fledged war. So because of that, even the government has improved the economic forecasts for the whole year, and the banks have really taking it down a little bit. The mood of business improves based on the data from the National Bank. As at the end of May, the composite index was a little bit less, but more or less all sectors improved to their expectations. They are more or less in neutral zone. It means there are more optimists than pessimists, and really a much better mood is in the construction. That is really a sign that investment demand recovers. That's really a good sign. The worsening was only in trade, and because of that, the overall index decreased a little bit, but still the overall the index remains in the optimistic zone. Regarding the last few months, we have repacked the rating of problems for business. First, you remember it was the issues of security and physical security and supplies of electricity and heat, the gas, the water. So it's now different. Now the most difficult problems with business, it's the problems with logistics. Logistics now, it's the most painful now for the business. Apart from that, we can also see from the dynamics of the indicators our problems. We see the deterioration of the issue related to search of new staff. That's very unfortunate. Until the Kakhovska hydropower station was blew up, the change of evaluation of the direct losses, it was evaluated within the previous several months. Unfortunately, we don't have the concrete amount, but it seems it will be like several billion dollars. We are waiting for some more exact data, which exact settlements were flooded, which will remain flooded. This work is still lasting. Of course, it was started just yesterday, but yeah, we're looking forward to getting some clarifications from the authorities to make some monetary evaluation. But preliminary, these are the main articles. It's, of course, residential buildings and agriculture and land, energy, of course, the Kakhovskaya hydropower station to begin with. So we will have a lot of
прямих ефектів буде вплив з точки зору сільського господарства, з точки зору постачання води як для населення, так і побутових потреб, так і для потреб промисловості, металургійних підприємств, деякі, зокрема, найбільше наших ArcelorMittal вже заявили про можливе скорочення активності через нестачу води.
And the big consumer of that,
звісно, це
we didn't even calculate. It's hundreds of thousands of hectares, the energy systems, etc., etc. So it's a huge scale, which you can't really imagine. It's the analysis still less. Fortunately, so far, we don't have any influence regarding the security of the Zaporizhia power station, nuclear power station. Hopefully there is no influence on that. So let's now go over the sectors in energy. As was expected, that excessive energy is no longer there because the heat power blocks and the nuclear power blocks, they are being on renovation, sometimes on plant renovation, sometimes not always. So there was some even power outages in Kiev and in some other regions. They were without electricity for several hours, because also in the reliberated territories, some solar stations and stations, we also have less exports and have to import electric energy from the EU in order to compensate this disbalance. But so far, so good. Finally, the government, this was already discussed for several months. They increased fares for the population to make sure we balance the market a little bit, although the government didn't agree to the proposal, and
from the point of view of Kakhovkaya power station, now the direct effect we cannot see it right now. It will affect the future after the territories are liberated, but short-term effect upon the electricity system, it doesn't have the great. Definitely some lines of the network were ruined probably. But metallurgy, metal processing, metals, we had the pre-aggression and post-aggression times, and we would consider now some forecasts, they would be reconsidered, reviewed because of Kakhovka power station explosion. But upon the whole, the steel production was developing sustainably in comparison to the previous year, I mean the month after the aggression, after the invasion. But nevertheless, after such statements that metal area sector might need some more water, will feel the deficit of water, it might affect after the water issue is over, then we will see whether there's the disbalance or not. Agriculture. The sowing campaign was at the beginning, at the finishing, and this year it's about 8.5% down from 2022, and especially speaking about the pre-invasion times, and we know how to overcome this. Unfortunately, EU is banned on export of some grains, four kinds of grains and oilseeds from Ukraine to 5 neighboring countries, extended to September. And primarily it was for a month, now it's for more than a month. Fortunately, Moldova also stated about some plans, but we could agree it was this country. From the other point of view, we have the risk from the EU that some tariff quotas for some other products, just like poultry, eggs, frozen fruits, would come back and will be reestablished. And we can see the sabotage prolonged of that grain corridor, and we understand that it was made by Russia, caused EU to force Ukraine to take some pause. And now we have all those endless trucks, one, two ships, vessels instead of 80, um, uh, maybe some 8, 10 required. But now this channel capacity has been decreased as well, and ruining of Kakhovka power station will definitely impact it, because very huge areas of agricultural lands are also flooded, and that's it as for me. Thank you, Dmytro. I give it over to Masha Tomilina. It's over to you. Monetary situation and financial markets and FX policy. Good day. Hope you can see me. You can hear me. Yeah, great. Could you speak a bit louder? All right, I'll try. So let's come to monetary policy analysis. Let's first of all consider the rates. 25% as for the key rate, and the key policy rate remains unchanged at 25%, and hence the appeal of hryvnia assets sustain the stability of the FX market and create favorable conditions for ongoing disinflation and easing of the burdensome foreign exchange restrictions. The yield of 1-year hryvnia military bonds remains at 18.5%. At the end of April, average rates on retail deposits continued to rise slowly. Interest rates on 12-month retail deposits rose to 14.6%, and rates on 3-month deposits increased to 13.6%. In April, inflation has been declining faster than expected, and the growth in consumer price decelerated to 17.9%. Monthly term prices grew by 0.2%, and the National Bank has published this in the report in the end of April. And taking more details, the decline in inflation is attributed to abundant food and fuel supplies in comparison to what was expected, strengthening of hryvnia at the market, improved inflation expectation, and the influence of base effects from the previous year's acceleration. Core inflation decreased to 16.9%, while growth in administrative price slowed to 10.9%, probably due to last year's base effects and stabilization of fuel prices. Nevertheless, the ordinary sustainable acceleration posed risk to inflation, but the moratorium on rising utility prices for household also retrains to the increase in administrative prices. And the stabilization of the prices for the fuel and the moratorium restrain the increase. It all impacts, even though we speak about that deceleration for a month, still the dynamic works because of the high level of uncertainty. Speaking about the bank sector of Ukraine, we can see the volume of household deposits continues to increase, primarily the term ones across all groups of banks except for private bank. The term deposit in hryvnia increased a little bit more than on demand due to high interest rates compared to short-term deposits. However, the dynamics of fixed retail deposits have been different. The term ones result growth in April compared to previous months, while the deposits on demand continue growing slowly. Loans to residents, and it was caused by the strengthening of hryvnia, and the loans to residents continue to decrease both for hryvnia and foreign currency loans. Demand for loans remained low, with lending primarily focused on the designed affordable loans, 5.9% in March 2023. Banks continue to recognize loan losses. NPL grew to 39% at the beginning of May, which is 12.6 higher than in February 2022. And the FX policy official core rate remains fixed after correction in July last year. Hryvnia has strengthened, but in May the rose the demand to buy the FX as in comparison to the previous year. And we can say that reserves increased, international reserves increased by 4% in May, reaching $37.3 billion. The second highest level to August 2011. They were primarily due to sustainable and regular inflows from international partners, suppressing the NBU set net FX sales and Ukraine's debt repayment. And NBU continued to ease FX restriction in the insurance sector and clarified the restriction process for interest on domestic government debt secured by foreign investors. And the investor is supposed to own those bonds for 90 days in a row before getting those rates. So this to avoid the repatriation as for the foreign investors. Thank you. That's it. Thank you. Our last block of presentation, our monthly presentation, is the presentation as for budget, what is happening to the situation with the budget. Maxim Samoiluk, economist, it's over to you. CES. Thank you, Hlib. And in short, about fiscal sector, in May, the tax revenues exceeded 100 billion hryvnia, and the largest was the revenue from the tax for the enterprises and then excise, and together with have provided more than 30 billion hryvnia to the budget, the same nominal level, net level, the previous months, and the net VAT, domestic VAT, net domestic VAT brought in 17 billion hryvnia in May. Exercise and subsoil rent decreased a bit by 4% and 8% over the month. And fiscal sector, tax revenues, non-tax revenues, we have positive dynamics, and according to our forecasts, a bit over, we had more in May rather than in April. NBU revised, and it appeared to be able to receive about 70 billion, and the further forecast may be revised upward after the expected return to pre-war taxation expected in July, and that coming back to 20% VAT is supposed to come, and pre-war exercise rates for the fuel, restricting the opportunities to use the simplified taxation system. And 2/3 of the expenditures of the budget is covered by the defense and security, absolutely normal for the country in war. And after that decrease of the state expenditures in February and in March, and now they are stabilized since May and in June, and the largest civil so-called spending item is social security, first of all pensions, retirement payment, but nevertheless defense dominates. Other 4-month expenses include healthcare, education, expenditures for state expenditures, and 15% of expenditures of the state budget. And in fact, they are balanced with the previous military months, including 2022. In May, Ukraine has received 3.3 billion of foreign funding transfers from the international banks, from the USA, $1.6 billion loan from the EU, and $1.25 billion grant from the US. Additionally, the World Bank disbursed 0.4 billion of loans dollars loans. And after successful completion of the first review of the IMF program, Ukraine will receive $0.9 billion, and we expect this next loan from the EU and other partners. If we have a look at the dynamics of 5 months of this year, the situation is stable, sustainable, and according to the plans developed before, we have the revenues coming, some months less, just like this month, some months more, just like the previous one. Upon the whole, the costs we have received in 5 months are enough to cover completely the needs in covering those deficiencies in the budget. But for the next month, we have the probability that that financial gap is supposed to be covered by means of involving new credit and grant and loan finances publicly. We don't know whether it would be able to cover it, but Ukrainians and foreign governors many times would say that they are sure that we go sustainably this period. Thank you so much as for the budget. Thank you. Thank you, Max. And upon the whole, the situation looked, at least at the beginning of this week, more or less positive. If we speak about financial sustainability and about the confidences, moods of business, dynamics in many sectors of economy. And I would like to remind you that on our website, those presentations we offer every month, they are available. You can come back to them. And in fact, Maxim presenting just right now is responsible for track of Ukrainian economy during the war times. It's available on our website, CES UA. As soon as we have the data on the major economic indicators, Max updates them immediately in Ukrainian and English. They look nicely, and this is the dashboard of Ukrainian economy. And right now, I come back to the discussion part. What was happening in the economy of Ukraine, Ukrainian business during the year? We call it the recovery year after Russians left northern oblasts, and the threats to Ukraine as a country became secondary, so it wasn't that acute. So we invited the representatives of different business sectors, and right now I would probably call in the order that I will give it the word over. So I will introduce first, and first I would like to ask to Olga Trofimtseva to comment. She's the ambassador of special affairs of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the assistant of the Ministry of Agriculture of Ukraine. And we will start with agro. Why so? Because of the news this week, because the impact of Kakhovka dam explosion, impact that will be the greatest upon agriculture, because agriculture is the base of the economy of some oblasts of Ukraine. And then I would ask the general overview of the situation, and I would ask Evgeny Zaigraiev to answer this question: who is the board member of PrivatBank responsible for working with MSB, SMB, small medium businesses, and having such waves? And I would like, in trade, commerce, what happens with the consumable demand? And then Fozzy Group, you're welcome. The chiefs of Fozzy Hypermarket, Sitpos Hypermarket, Fora, and many other networks. And the last one, I would like to give it over to Borys Rybachuk, who is the new speaker for our events. He is the Deputy Director General of Industries, and we would like to invite someone from the industry, because it's clear that capital sector of Ukrainian economy is in tough conditions, circumstances during the war, and it would be interesting to hear what is happening in the industry, particularly machine engineering. So as I've just introduced, I give it over to Olga. And we have two obvious questions to you. First of them is the loan one. What was happening? What are the tendencies in the agri sector? And we can monitor the news, take into account the grain corridor, but what is happening in the sector of food industry, which has very many different industries, enterprises that use or not use the chance. Do they have something positive, or the situation is weak? And the impact of the new Russian tariff upon the agro sector. It's over to you.
Many thanks, Gleb, for the invitation. I'm also the new speaker for you, and I would like to also thank, and I'm very happy to see colleagues today. If we talk about agri-food sector during this more than 1 year of the full-fledged invasion of Russia into Ukraine, we can mention that in principle, like in other sectors of the economy, it has gone through some stages, starting from the primary shock and feeling despair, and ending with more or less certain stabilization. I would call it the companies that started to adapt, at least started to adapt to conditions where they are. And we saw this regarding all the main indicators, part of which you have demonstrated in your presentation, and the ones that you have on your website, as far as I know. And what concerns exactly what we saw, that in contrast to all of the complications, the Ukrainian food exports showed really good dynamics, and we understand that even the grain corridor didn't work in a stable manner since the beginning. And we, of course, have seen a significant reorientation. If we talk about agro-export to the markets of the European Union, then we saw how China also played back the important number one for the Ukrainian agri-products, namely, of course, for the grain products. And definitely the situation right now in the Ukrainian export is such that in the pre-war times, the Ukrainian agri-production export brought some 44% of the foreign currency revenues. It's now, at least in the beginning of the year, in the first quarter of the year, it's some 65% of the whole foreign currency revenue of Ukraine. In other conditions, that would call a certain feeling of being proud, but in the conditions of today, they're simply not there. We understand why it's like that. And if we talk not only about this raw export component, if we talk about the processing industry who you have mentioned, then the situation is slightly different, because there are several components which I wanted to pay your attention to. What was happening over the last year, and maybe Dmytro Tsygankov also will add, because he is also a representative of retail from his side. First of all, really, the processing industry are feeling also very difficult times from various reasons, and many of the producers of the food products are forced to relocate their production facilities, change and get somehow used to the new conditions, including in terms of the mobilization, partial mobilization of their employees, and also to the fact that I would call it that the internal consumption market also dropped significantly. We see the growth of poverty, the growth of unemployment in parallel. So the structure of consuming food products is also changing. I can see that retail is definitely monitoring this. And some of our producers of food products, the ones who have such a possibility, they started to search for bigger opportunities for the export of their products, especially into the European Union countries to begin with. Geographically, that's the closest, irrespective of the open. Yeah, we have the agrarian no visa, the tariff quotas are lifted, and we have less issues to the processed food products. The European Commission continues their investigations regarding several sectors where we have the chicken meat and some other frozen foods, but still most of the products, including juices and confectionery, they still can go to the European Union countries. Of course, if you definitely meet some minimum entry requirements and if you're registered as the one who can actually export to the European countries. If we talk about the mood, I would also like to recollect it was last month. There were two big agrarian events here in Kiev, and I paid my personal attention, talking to a large number of farmers from various regions, to the fact that the farmers, even from the Sumy region, from the Kharkiv region, Dnipropetrovsk region, they're quite positively oriented, and it's very interesting. Maybe it will be also interesting for the other sectors as well as the industry and the ones who are either producing or importing. The farmers are investment, irrespective of all the complexities, irrespective of the fact that very often they get not the best price for their grains. Sometimes it's too low and not always covers their costs for the production. Nevertheless, this played a significant role. The previous really successful seasons until 2021, the agrarian business, let's put it frankly, was really profitable, and quite a lot of agrarians had certain financial security pillows, financial pillows, and even the small farmers are trying to invest, first of all, into the capacity to store grains or oil seeds, process seeds and oil seeds, grains, and into the capacity for the primary processing of these products. And they are sometimes trying to unite, especially the small farmers, when they don't have independently such capacity, they are trying to unite. I mean, it's not cooperatives, it's just like clusters, some regional associations. That's one of the positive side effects, no matter how cynically it would sound, from this very difficult situation of the war. And one other very important trend, which I want to pay your attention, we will see it a little bit later, although I believe we saw it already this season, it's of course the change in the plantation areas. And that's where I'm going to the item number 2, the Kakhovska hydropower station and the blowing up of the dam by Russian terrorists, the change of the structure of the plantation areas, and in general, the change in the agrarian production and in the production in the food sector. We will see that not only this season, but also the next years, because of all of these complications, because of export of agricultural produce. A lot of farmers, especially in the central, eastern, and the northern eastern part, are starting to think what really makes sense to produce corn, or it was staying at the traditional product mix, such as sunflower, corn, or they need to change the structure and to bring in some new products into their plantation structure. And item number 2 is to transfer to other cultures, not seeds, not grains, not oil seeds, which is some, these are very, very much traditional commodities. Because the influence of yesterday's terroristic act, we can't make a quick assessment. Yes, your quick assessment is vital, is true. If we are talking about the Rybachuk, more than 10,000 hectares of agricultural lands were flooded that were already planted, sown, so they lost it. On the left bank, many more agricultural lands on the temporarily occupied territories are, and these are really very much direct losses that we already see today, but we also see through the news which are coming from the north, from the south, that the water is still rising, much slower, but the situation still unfolds, and we will be able to really assess the final situation only in a few days. We have a lot of forests flooded, the fishery, and also the irrigation, 400,000 hectares, they are at a danger. I just don't have the power to talk about it, because from all points of view, That's very much long-term lasting effect, very negative. We will not see it now in 1 year, but we will feel it in the following 5 to 10 years, as some of the experts are already talking about it today. Because the irrigation system restoration, especially on such a territory, this is a very, very difficult, expensive project. And once again, it will also depend on the security situation. I'm bringing this to its permanent idea. The best managers for irrigation, these are actually our armed forces of Ukraine, because from the extent how the overall security situation will look like in this region, this will also mean how it will be restored. And of course, ecological consequences are difficult to evaluate. Some 10 billion hryvnia already mentioned, because some 3 state reservoirs are flooded, and this will also definitely will affect the further ecological situation, biodiversity situation. So if we go back to some pragmatic aspect of the agricultural production and the production of agricultural products, I think this is in a very optimistic option. It's minus 10% of it's also a big minus for the watermelons and melons, fruits and berries, a significant minus. But also there is, we would have some advice to agri producers, because many people are thinking already now they will be going to a production of exactly those cultures which were not traditional for them. And this will make sense, no? Because even this season, no matter how loud this would be, about some cheap vegetables, these southern cultures, we simply can't talk about. We can forget about them. So it will be a very stable advice from previous year. If you have something to grow on your own dachas, on your own land, the so-called the gardens of victory, and those farmers who are doing this commercially, it will be, please pay more attention to this, and maybe go from oil seeds, from the grains, do yourself the fruits and vegetables. Thank you, Olga. I know you have limited time. Thank you so much. Yeah, so I will still stay. I will listen to my colleagues. Very interesting. In parallel, there are 2 interesting events, because, you know, we have also in Kiev the Forum of Business Communities, who are organizing boards, and SUP, business community, business coalition of Ukraine, where we will talk about other different issues. And I'm also have to say a few words about Euro integration. Yes, it's a day of discussions today.
Let's now come to financial sector. Yevhen, it's over to you. First question, obvious to the biggest bank of Ukraine. In such times when in the country we don't have any kind of proper statistics, banks are the alternative resource of data. What can you see from the point of view of the scope of business operations? Can you see that recovery probably as for those operations in line with about those operations with those who have the account in your bank, PrivatBank? Do you have positive dynamics? Do you have any peculiarities in sectors, maybe any differences? And what is happening to the demand of the enterprises for the bank services, maybe loans? In some sectors, what bank services are demanded? How banks, particularly your bank, can satisfy the needs. So very many questions. It's over to you. Thank you so much, dear. Good day, dear colleagues. I'm on a business trip, I'm in a car. I hope that here the connection will be good and stable. Very many questions. And PrivatBank, we can say, can be the trademark of statistic data in Ukraine, because 60% of physical individual proprietors and 40 other and 40% of the entrepreneurs have accounts and deal with PrivatBank. And have a look at the statistics of the private bank, then we can have the understanding of what situation we have. At the beginning of war, the activeness of the people was decreased, moderated. One transaction or a couple of transactions, some scope of transactions per month. We have many different metrics, but for some 40% we had the decrease last year. It means that in March last year, 40% of entrepreneurs and individual proprietors didn't do any transaction. And then we have the increase. Increase was gradual with a minimal inflections, and we had one single decrease in February and in January. It's seasonal. It wasn't that great. It's not that significant decrease, and the increase was then the next step. And as for February last year, we don't have that level, but we are almost there. We have not recovered that much, but the amount of the clients, active clients, one of the matrix, we have transactions, 25,000 hryvnia per month. And as for today, 520,000 active consumers. And we had in February 520,000 in February 2022, and then we had 340,000. You can feel that decrease. And now the country is recovered. As for the entrepreneurship, many entrepreneurs came back to active work. They are back to Ukraine. And as for transactions, it's clear that there was some decrease last year, more or less the same, and the same was the amount of increase, but the speed of transactions is increase of that processes is higher. For example, in the second part of 2022, clients of the private bank altogether, on the average, would make 6.6 billion payments a year. In 2023, it was 7.1 billion payments a month. So the previous number was also for the months. So 8.2 billion payments per month as for the previous months. And December is the peak as for the activity, climax of the activity of the business. So in December we had even lower activity, and in May we had very active clients. What is the record, new record? And we can see such changes in micro and small businesses and currency exchange operations. We can see that the activity of business here increases. It means that we become more open to export, import, operation with the external markets, foreign markets. We reorient into European external foreign markets, and in May, clients made such 200,000 operations, and last year only 162,000. So we speak not about inflation, increase of money, but about the activity of clients year after year. Speaking about IT segment, this the huge amount as for the individual proprietors. 70% of individual proprietors deal with such current exchanges, and the number of the amount of transactions has increased for 23%. May, June were the March were the months of shock last year, and since then different industries and areas, sectors are now recovering. As for the acquiring is also important. Having 60% of terminals all over Ukraine, we can see how our people buy food medicines and other things, how they go to restaurants, cafes. And in May this year, we can see that the amount of the operations through the terminals, 253 million times for billions of hryvnia. Most of them for trade, 84% of the turnover. And this number decreases. Last year in May it was 88%. And now we come from expenditures for food, we come to expenditures for restaurants, cafes, shops, healthcare. But this transition moves slowly, but the amounts of the transactions increase, credit and lending, and using all foreign platforms. I say thank you to all businesses in Ukraine, because demand for the loans is good, but the loans are given for those money to work, for them to be repaid, as credit should be repaid. And the subnormal positive quality of that loan profile formed in 2022, 2021, and we can observe it right now. Not only PrivatBank, but many other banks. We can see it in different forums and when communicating with each other. And Ukrainian business has become more responsible during the war times, just like the whole society. They are more grouped. Let's say, for example, during the crisis 2004, 2008, 2009, having crises, for many businessmen it would be great honor not to repay that loan. But right now, business people are very responsible. We have a great example, PrivatBank, the level of problematic and potentially problematic loans, it's about 5.5%. And before the nationalization of the bank, we had different numbers. Before 2016, we had another numbers, and it was a good segment, appropriate for the pre-war times. And after 15 months of war, we have better results, and most part of those 5%, we speak about 3.54% are formulated by those who took loans on the occupied territory. And we understand that those people on the occupied territories, that is where they cannot pay that loans, and they can pay that NPL in their loans. So if we do not take into consideration those loaners from the occupied territories, so then we have the perfect profiles of loaners. State programs, responsible business, 579 programs. If the entrepreneur does not pay the loan, then that entrepreneur cannot be a part of the state programs. Last year the demand was shocked a bit, and we could observe it in agrarian sector. This year agrarians are not that vividly moving to the banks. Last year financial year wasn't that positive, and for the secondly they corrected their plans, their yields, crops, and now entrepreneurs are more responsible about taking loans, and banks now have recovered. Last year PrivatBank has issued 35% of all of the credits for the spring sowing campaign. Some other state banks also have given some parts. The rest would not credit almost nothing. And now banks continue supporting their clients. Our portion of the loans for the sowing campaign has decreased to 21% because now the banks also offer some loans. But we can see some demand. We can see decreasing demand. The demand in processing industry, in transport, logistics. Everyone wants to buy vehicles, for example, to export grains, to import and other things, and definitely we have great demand from the branches. These are that way interconnected with this defense, drones, some other things, systems, and there is some demand for recovery of the infrastructure and some commercial objects entities. Even though much businesses have been relocated from Kharkiv, Kherson Oblast into Central and Western Ukrainian parts. Upon the whole, the portion of the turnover finances is decreasing because of the needs for the investment credits and leasing. And even though, as for today, that portion is not that great, last year, investment financing was interesting only to 17% of our loaners and 17% of the structure of the loans given, even though such loans are the priority for us. And this year, 27% is the portion. We have decreased from 17% to 27%, but pre-war times it was about 40%. That's why business is careful about investing. And to end up, to summarize, as for the services and demand, the services are demanded by the security and are attributed to security. And we, especially during blackouts, we were very fast about providing online services for payments, to receive the payments, for the terminals to work at supermarkets, at the gas station, fuel station, but there was an issue. Business, for example, should make their own payments and payment delegations, instructions, and there was no connection. And quickly, IT applications were made for our our application PrivatBank to work. For example, to save, for the person to be able to save what they were doing in that application, then be able to come to our offices where there was Starlink, where they could charge their phones, and there they could even make those payments, not to sit for a long time over each payment document. And during the war times, we could elaborate those procedures. And now the interesting example, cash at a checkout. Business, banking, and retail. What happened during the first days of war? Everyone would run to the cash machine, ATM machine could not work. We could not load that huge amount of cash that people wanted to take. From the other point of view, banks and we also were helping the armed forces of Ukraine, armored cars, and those bank cars being armored were delivered to the armed forces of Ukraine. Retail has huge amount of the money in the checkouts, no fuel problem with delivering the cash, and people want to get that cash, and ATM cannot provide this. And we very quickly could navigate in the situation with supporting the payment systems. We could disseminate the services of paying their cash. Checkouts have increased the limits from 500 hryvnia to 5,000 hryvnia. And as for today, that jump from a few thousand million a month, for today, 2 billion hryvnia being taken as a cash. It's a huge portion, to about 4-5% of all of the cash taken from the ATM machines all over Ukraine. And people can feel flexible, mobile, and business needs also can be satisfied. That is why, speaking about online services, opening accounts online, online signature smart ID, which we call them, we have cloud special system. And during the first months before the war, we could pay with the card, not through terminals but through the phones. It increases, and year after year we can see that great increase YoY. And that cloud signature, May last year 135,000, May this year 197,000 amount of signatures. And this is about all of the digital services, because people during COVID know how to work distantly, and during the war times they work not only distantly but love to work digitally and started to do it this way. And indeed it helps the bank, let's say so, to be more flexible, to support serving the clients and be more efficient, especially if we speak about P&L, and it's convenient for the clients. Thank you.
Thank you, Evgeny. Thank you so much for really attentively looking at the questions which we sent to you. really a lot of very interesting information which we couldn't find anywhere else before. Dmytro, you're not for the first time here since the beginning of the war, because retail, it's the front line of the economy that every day has the contact with people, with their primary needs. And I would really love to ask you to, from various sides, to look at it, what has happened throughout this year. First of all, what happened, namely with the consumers, with their needs. We are talking today more about business, but yeah, of course, the business comes from the needs of consumers, how they are distributed, to which extent the situation has normalized in the regions, in groups, social demographic groups. And number two, what actually has happened to retail over this year? Because we look at it, the supermarkets are there, the prices are growing, it seems like things are all right, but then we look at the financial indicators, losses, oh my God. Then how resilient are the representatives of the retail trade? Can we expect for the recovery of everything good that we saw in your sector, which by many metrics has even outperformed the European colleagues? Colleagues, first of all, I would not call it recovery, I would call it stabilization. Definitely. Compared to March, April last year, this may look like recovery. That's stabilization at the levels of the summer last year, I would call it this way. Because first of all, when we say recovery, we can't really say the word recovery because it's very difficult in this asset sulfur assets to talk about upstream. We can't talk about recovery when we have several millions of people simply don't buy anything. They're simply not in the country anymore. Unfortunately, this is the reality of today. And if we, for instance, see compared to May last year, if we are calculating plus 8% of the visitors until May last year, but compared to May 2021, it's minus 16%. These people simply didn't arrive. They're somewhere around outside of the country. So we can talk about stabilization, because stabilization of supply chains have taken place. We have found almost all the products which we lost in the beginning of the war, in the spring of last year. We have also more fierce pricing competition in retail, and this is normal. So you have to see a lot of promotions in shops of various formats. So for those visitors who are staying in the country, we start to fight for them. And I wouldn't underestimate some psychological factors, such as missile attacks in May, which started to be really, and irrespective of the air defense, anti-air defense that is working really well, that's a psychological factor that keeps people from returning to the country or pushes them out of the country. So it will be difficult to talk about recovery until the war is finished with our victory. So it's a relative stabilization. Over the last year, we learned, and I think the whole retail learned a lot of new, how to bring in food products with railway, how to import fuel to supply your logistics and the rest. From the other side, if we look at it, we talked about unemployment. We can also state that in the end of summer, beginning of autumn last year, we almost didn't have vacancies not filled. That is 100% of filled vacancies. What does it mean? It's tens of thousands of people who work in shops. And now, closer to end of winter, we have received unfilled vacancies at the level of several percent. And that means that unemployment as such, we probably don't have. Maybe it's there in some specific sectors, maybe something didn't get restored, but there is no such huge unemployment that would pressure the number of vacancies. So what else of interesting I can tell? In the regional breakdown, what is interesting happening? Do you see return of people in the framework of Ukraine, recovery of receiving revenue in the regions where people left, less influence? No, in the Western regions, there is no basic change. Over the last half a year, they have a positive dynamics for the number of visitors in our shops. Kyiv has recovered versus the winter period. The eastern and southern regions, we don't see such a big growth of the number of people who come to our shops. So everything is kept at the level of winter, autumn last year. And I'm thinking that not thanks to, but because of those new missile attacks, the new wave of terror, we will not see any further growth until autumn. To my last question regarding the situation in retail as business, you mentioned minus 16% of visitors, but the shops are there and the shelves are all there, and you have to pay rent where there is a trading center, shopping center, so the employees are there. So to which extent the business has the possibility not to go into red, not to become unprofitable? How easy it is for you to keep the break-even point? The increase of prices will not solve it because it will decrease the volume of sales. So how you tackle with this situation? Definitely, the big experience of many crises in the country has taught us how to be flexibly adapting to various conditions. And in this case, it was most difficult to have the decisions about the optimization of staff in shops and offices, and mainly in offices. Stopping some programs and initiatives which we initiated. They were more aimed at satisfying clients, not so much for the survival. So closing up some initiatives, it helped us to save some money, to survive, let's put it this way. So we do have the experience of flexible reacting response to some crisis conditions, and not looking at the fact that if the prices go up, the volumes go down, but we are the first to receive money from the visitors, and then we are translating this story further down the chain. So cash flow is better than in many other industries, because we are the first in getting the money from the population, to put it very roughly. But that's very much difficult because of shortening of the activity, shortening the new innovative programs, opening new shops, etc., etc. So over the last year, we opened only shops which were already ready to be opened, still until the full-fledged invasion. So we didn't put any new investment into opening new shops, and that's where we had to cut ourselves significantly. So that's the way it is. Clear. Thank you, Dmytro. Let's come to the last topic of today, to industry. Borys, are you with us? Yes, I'm with you. We don't see a video. KMZ Industries, this is the company that is working in agricultural machine building. You can say a few words with what you're working, why we have decided to call you to this event, because we saw information that irrespective of 1 year of war, the company manages to grow its indicator by expanding the demand in agriculture. But also, that's an interesting story. But from the other side, I really would want to combine the positive things with reality for companies which are capital intensive, like the agricultural machine building. So let's try to look at what is happening with business, the business during the war. As far as I understand, your company also entered the war in a very good shape because agriculture grew, the demand grew. Whether you were able to keep the demand during the war, where you're able to satisfy the demand, and to which extent the state has helped you or vice versa interfered with your efforts, and to which extent you see any prospects in this industry after the victory to make sure that the Ukrainian economy would be balanced and all sectors would be represented in it. Thank you, Hlib. First of all, a few words about KMZ Industries. That's a company that does the production of elevator equipment. We are making all the complex. So we are closing all the technology for the elevator complex. Really, the agrarians, as Olga said, they had a certain reserve. There were some really good years before the war. Correspondingly, during the last years, especially 2021, the whole market was booming for everyone. All our colleagues also enjoyed the financial results and also good sales. And surprisingly, as it may seem, 2022, already after the start of the full-fledged war, it was no exception. We even grew by 15%, but mainly this was connected with the fact that we have quite an inert business. These are complicated projects. Correspondingly, they are planned. The design phase sometimes takes place 1 year or several years before the production. So we had a lot of contracts already concluded before the beginning of the war, in the end of February, and correspondingly, a lot of clients were already forced to continue their construction in order to protect the investment, which they actually already did into land, permits, foundations, and of course, advance payments for our equipment. So we could, after a few weeks of shock, we recovered. And first of all, it hit all of the logistics chains, because some 80% of the materials which we used in the production we export. So logistics, checkpoints, fuel, cars, everything grew so much expensive. And a lot, there was fewer. So we calculated the new pricing, and if you were to continue, the price would grow in such a way, or we stay in contract terms, but we go back to production when the situation normalizes. And actually, that's what happened. And this policy allowed us, on the one hand, to load the production in the first months of the war, March, April, May, and then starting from the summer, when things normalized with the fuel, when some of our Ukrainian suppliers very quickly, we can also say that they're good guys. They relocated their production from Kharkiv, from other eastern oblasts to center, to west, and they restored their production. So we were able to switch to their parts, which were less expensive than European.
But speaking about this year, definitely money loves silence, especially large investment projects. In this year, we have decrease of demand. We can feel it. It's much more difficult to be rivals at the markets for each buyer consumer, and for about a month. And in fact, our season is over of our active contracting, and we believe to have 25–30% decrease of the revenues in comparison to the last year. As for whether the country helped us, we did not relocate our production. We didn't have the direct need to have some direct assistance, even though some colleagues I know used actively the relocation with the help of the state finances and implemented it successfully, and they were grateful that they had such an opportunity. Right now, the major problem, and we do need the assistance of the state and to protect the interest of Ukrainian machine engineering during the next stage when rebuilding, because it's positive that right now, before the war is over, we have very many foreign grantors who allocate finances actively for recovering the elevator complexes, grain elevators complexes, and special grant allocated especially for our sector. But these possibilities are very risky to our sector. Why do we need the state help? Because it's clear that many grantors would like to provide support, allocating finances for procurement of equipment from their own country, for their own producers. And correspondingly, within the framework of the grant, if it's, for example, Danish, then Danish granted Danish equipment, Italian granted Italian equipment, but having no separation of the finances within the grant. If some part is not given to Ukrainian producer, but only one requirement, money for an equipment, then definitely it would kick off the ground under us, because we would need to choose whether to work further on and to loan money from somewhere or get the opportunity to have the grant, another grant with another opportunities, whatever the client is. As for Ukrainian worker, Ukrainian green tea, then we have choice and we actually communicate. We would like to work through the association, through the support of the government for some grants to allocate some finances to procure exactly Ukrainian equipment, and we have some success. For example, recently we had the grant for building the combined feed production, and we had 50-50 grant. 50 for procurement of Danish and 54% for Ukrainian equipment. And the government of Denmark agreed, and it was easy, and agreed that and recognized that they support Ukrainian machine engineering, which is extremely important. As for your last question about the perspectives of machine engineering, as with the market players, we have such perspectives in Ukraine, because despite war, despite the reduction of the population, and as for now, we don't understand what number of people will come back, but yet we have great number of high specialists with high expertise. We have equipment, we have specialists, we have our know-how, and in comparison to the EU, we have the low level of salaries, even though we understand that the salaries are supposed to grow. For example, having the competition, having the reduced amount of qualified specialists, professionals, and what is more, the production costs are much lower. I mean, electricity, water, taxes for land, etc. And that is why we have some surplus of strength, and that is why we cannot be sustainable. And globally, machine engineering, to my mind, is not different from other businesses, because the major issue is whether every company has a perspective at the market. It's about the product itself, whether there is the market for this product, whether it's competitive. Why can we feel this? Because during the pre-war times, we had only those actively participating in tenders. We had 10, 20 players, European, foreigners, different Canadians, Americans, Turkish people, and 7 Ukrainian producers. That is why during each tender we could at least see half of them. And it would give us a sense of the advantages and disadvantages of each product, and gives the sense that without developing a product, without investment to R&B, you cannot be successful in this market in the long-term perspective. And this is about our internal development. That is why we all the time renew our lines, so take into consideration new trends, new options we can offer. And from the point of view of the clients, definitely to build elevator complexes, huge investments are required. That is why to increase the perspective of this branch, and the access to cheap loans, and this access our clients having that access to cheap loans, it will impact our sector, and we are ready to produce that volume that will be consumed by the market. And it's clear to us that it increases our incomes, revenues, and we're ready to invest to increase, for example, the park of equipment, or to increase the number of the workers. Borys? Thank you so much. Indeed, really positive picture, even though it's not that merrily that this year, the scope of orders will be much lower than you had it last year. But it's interesting that in the context of clients, you mentioned the problem of accessibility of cheap money, cheap cash. I'm used to all the time hear from industries that Ukrainian industry will never be able to raise without cheap loans, and you, only at the end, only somehow intermediary mentioned it. Does it mean that for your business directly, the availability of cheap loans to provide financing of the production cycle is not that critical? Let's say so. Indeed, having cheap loans and the availability and cheap resources availability, it's always an advantage because they would increase the rentability of business. But we manage to have the turnover finances and to use the available offers from the banks. As for the investment programs, the major our approach is about careful calculation of what output we're going to have, what investment is required, and what should be the indicator of success in this or that project. And our major stakeholder, Devim Capital, and through them we can get and we receive assistance for those projects we implement. That is why for us it's a bit less, only by means that we have the proper stakeholder, just the right one. I can understand you. Thank you so much, Borys. And we had one question from Olga Tucha from the National Bank. Olga has left us. I've asked her the question. I asked her this question directly. I mean, Olga Trofimtseva has left, and it was a question about the reasons of the loss of the grains because of the explosion of Kakhovka Dam at the electricity power station, and I would like to retell you her answer. We're speaking not about the flooded those cropped areas. in the Dnipro Oblast, the crops were also irrigated, and having no irrigation, it would be impossible to have proper crops yields, and it's extremely terrific for the wheat. And if any of you present here, dear speakers or listeners, if you have any comments, you have a chance to raise your hand. If you don't have such comments, then I would like to say thank you to everyone who joined today. Thank you, dear colleagues who participated as speakers. Today we had very many interesting numbers, and through our social media, we're going to deliver those numbers to our listeners, to our audience. Why did we want to gather the representatives of business? Just because to listen to how it's going on in life, because on the level of general numbers, we don't have so many of them. But we cannot understand anything. We need to talk to people who, in fact, directly work and can see what happens with the offer, with the demand, with the domestic foreign market. Thank you so much, everyone, participating next month. I invite everyone for the same discussion. We're going to have another focus topic, but we're going to have an overlook of the situation in the economy. We will see the consequences of what has happened in the south of Ukraine, and then we will have some damage estimates. Having any ideas what we should focus upon, please suggest, write it for us. Thank you, everyone. Have peaceful evening, night, and all the best in your business, in your work, and in your life. Thank you so much. See you.
Дякую, до побачення.
Дякую, до побачення.